All right. ETM Hotep, want to welcome everyone to our live Divine Words Wednesday hangout. And you're hanging with the Seshew Medew Netcher. And my name is Wujao Mineb Eri Ma'at. And tonight we have other members of the Seshew Medew Netcher on the panel. So if you all can unmute yourselves and introduce yourselves, let everyone know who's with us tonight.
ETM Hotep. Welcome in peace. This is June. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the show. Hotep.
ETM Hotep, St. Judy. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Hopefully everybody learned something and take something away from the show tonight. Peace.
Hotep, Reni, Tonika, my name is Tonika, and I'd like to welcome you all to our Divine Words Wednesday. Welcome.
Hotep, this is Sean. Just want to welcome everyone to the show. Hopefully everyone will enjoy, and you have a good day.
ETM Hotep, Duau, Day in Uncle Jal Zaneb, Hekanu in Amin Ra Bata Kwa E Sekum, Ren E Kofi Paisai. On behalf of the Seshew, we just want to thank you all for tuning in to the show, and we would all just like to welcome you all.
All right. And I'm sure the other brothers will be joining us as well. All right. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get into our topic for tonight. And if just one of you all can let me know when it can be seen.
Yes, we can see from you.
All right. All right. Actually, okay. All right, so we can jump right on in. So again, welcome to our Divine Words Wednesdays, and we are the Seshew Medew Netcher, and obviously you are watching us on our YouTube channel. But if you haven't subscribed as of yet, please subscribe so you'll be kept up to speed and get notified when we have our online sessions. Now we have a few series of videos that we do, or sessions and hangouts that we do. Tonight is our Divine Words Wednesdays, but we also have Freestyle Fridays, where we get online and we have fun. It's basically a fun study session where we eliminate the use of the books in terms of dictionaries and things, and we pick an inscription, or one is recommended to us by anyone in our Facebook group that we, attempt to transliterate and translate on the fly, basically from memory. And that way it'll test our proficiency in the language. How much do we remember? Can we identify all of the glyphs individually? Can we identify words? Do we know what their meanings are? So that's a good exercise we recommend everyone do. And we also encourage crowd participation. All right. So audience participation through the chat. It's kind of limited on YouTube, but we do our best. And then we also have a third series called Welcome to the Sabaite Dome, where those are hangouts where we take controversial issues in the social community as it relates to Kemet or the language, and then we address it. So we try to find out and discern the accuracy of various different claims. All right. And that particular series is, as these ideas or as these claims come up. So we don't have a particular day or consistent time for that series. All right. So that's what we have going on so far. And we're going to add some more some more series of hangouts and shows as we go along. All right. And please join our Facebook group, Seshew Ma'ani Medew Netcher on Facebook, where we have discussions. People share their research, people ask questions. If we make any errors on these hangouts or on even other posts and throughout Facebook or social media, that's the place to come and discuss it, bring it up, because our goal is for correct information, accuracy. All right. And we're all learning, so we're all susceptible to make mistakes or have errors. So we definitely invite and encourage people to correct us if we should make any mistakes. Now, before we actually jump into our topic, we always like to start off with a recitation of the offering formula. So I will pass the mic over to our Sonet Tonica.
All right, Dua. So I'll go ahead and do or recite the offering formula. And if you're looking at it on your screen, well, we have these 3 sections. On the top, that is what is known as the Seshew Medew Netcher, or hieroglyphs or hieroglyphics. And the part that is in the middle, that's the formula transliterated. And the bottom part, that's the translation, which is in English, obviously. And I'm going to recite it, and the pronunciation, would like to just make a disclaimer that it is what is known as Egyptology speak, is tentative, is not accurate. And yeah, so without further ado, let me just go ahead and recite. Oh yeah, and while I do that, if you're watching, you can also recite along with me, and I'm going to recite it in the name of the ancestors, which is known as Aku. But you can insert any name that you want to, of anybody that you feel that has passed along that you'd like to include in the offering formula. So so I'll just go ahead and do that right now. Hotep Dinesu, Wasir Nebjedu, Netcher Neb Abju, DF Beret Heru, T Henket Ka Aped Shes Menchet, Het Nebet Neferet Wabet Anket Netcher Im, Inkani Imahu, Aku Mahiru. And the translation is, an offering the king gives Osiris, Lord of Jedu, great God, Lord of Abydos, so that he may give verbal offerings in beer, bread, ox, fowl, alabaster, and linen, everything good and pure on which a god lives, for the car of the revered ones, the ancestors, justified. Yeah, and I'll go ahead and pass the microphone back to Ujao.
All right, Dua and Iker, as always. And just so people will know, we've adopted that practice of going over the recitation before we jump into our discussions and things from Dr. Rakete Amin, who has the one who's actually does that. And it's a very good way of starting off any kind of cipher, build session, discussion, class, and things like that, because it kind of sets the tone. We all always want to invoke the ancestors or have a sense of reverence to the ancestors and things, and giving an offering formula, which may be a topic for a whole hangout. We can talk about the offering formula itself and how prolific it was throughout all of Kemet, and basically what it means and what it was used for. So maybe we can do a hangout for that. But it's also a good way to start off any gathering, similar to the libation ritual that you'll see a lot of people perform as well. All right. So tonight's topic will be a brief topic, and the topic is primary sources and attestation. All right. And this subject comes up because although primary sources and attestation may seem very straightforward and very simple, because you can simply look up in a dictionary or find out what these are, which is what I'm going to read, the definitions. But a lot of people will either neglect to use these terms properly, or the ideas or concepts that they represent improperly. Okay, so and we see that quite a bit on social media, on Facebook, when, you know, in discussing history, especially, you know, on the subject of history. You know, a lot of times, especially when we talk about ancient history, ancient Egypt or ancient Kemet, Kush, Nubia, and the many different African cultures, or just cultures period in history, you know, a lot of times people will use these terms, primary sources. So we're just gonna have a quick discussion about that, all right, and point out the differences. So source classification. Many sources can be considered either primary or secondary, depending on the context in which they are used. The distinction between primary and secondary sources is contextual, making it somewhat difficult to distinguish. A third level, the tertiary source, such as an encyclopedia or dictionary, resembles a secondary source in that it contains analysis, but attempts to provide a broad introductory overview of a topic. So we have primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. All right. So what is a primary source? Now, if you notice that the distinctions between primary and secondary sources is contextual. So it's pretty much relative. All right. So it's not a one definition fits all type of situation. And I think that's what causes some of the confusion that we see on social media. So hopefully we can discuss a little bit and straighten that out. So what is a primary source? The definition of a primary source varies depending upon the academic discipline and the context in which it's used. So in humanities, a primary source could be defined as something that was created either during the time period being studied or afterwards by individuals reflecting on their involvement in the events of that time. In the social sciences, the definition of primary source would be expanded to include numerical data that has been gathered to analyze relationships between people, events, and their environment. And in the natural sciences, a primary source could be defined as a report of original findings or ideas. These resources often appear in the form of research articles with sections on methods and results. Now, on this last one, in natural sciences, this is where you get the term original research. You know, a lot of people on social media use that phrase original research, and there's some people that will use that phrase improperly, but we could probably get into that as well. Now, in terms of a lot of the discussions that we see on social media as it relates to history, ancient Egypt, ancient Africa, period, will fall under humanities, you know, anthropology, and, you know, or history. So this first bullet will be the primary one invoked when we use this term primary source. All right. So let's go to what is a secondary source. So secondary sources are less easily defined than primary sources. Generally, they are accounts written after the fact with the benefit of hindsight. They are interpretations and evaluations of primary sources. So here's some examples of secondary sources. So when you see bibliographies, and sometimes bibliographies can be called tertiary because it depends on the academic discipline you're speaking of and the context. Yeah, biographical works are considered secondary. Commentaries, criticisms, dictionaries, encyclopedias, and these can be also considered tertiary. You have histories, literary criticism, such as journal articles, magazines, newspaper articles, monographs, textbooks, websites, etc. Okay, so these are secondary sources. The third, what is a tertiary source? Tertiary sources consist of information which is a distillation and collection of primary and secondary sources. So basically, it's like a source gathering source, if you will. So we have almanacs, bibliographies, chronologies, dictionaries, encyclopedias, directories, fact books, guidebooks, etc. All right, and textbooks as well, and they can also be considered secondary. All right. So attestation. Now this word is confused a bit as well on social media discussions. And so the definition of that is in the context of history, because we're talking about history mainly. Attestation deals with a form of evidence. So it is a thing that serves to bear witness, confirm, or authenticate, for which the evidence has survived to the present day. So like, for example, if you say something is attested, then it exists today. You can actually bear witness to it today. So if something way back in history in ancient times and it's attested, then it still survives to this day. Okay, that's what an attestation is, or something that is attested. All right. Now, one of the questions comes up quite frequently is when we're talking about primary sources. So let's go backwards first. Let me go back to primary source. Remember, the main one that we're invoking in the context of a lot of discussions on social media is in the context of history. So a primary source could be defined as something that was created during the time period being studied, or afterwards by the individuals reflecting on their involvement in the events of the time. So basically, a primary source is something that's direct, you know. So if you're studying, let's say, the 18th dynasty of Kemet, that time period, then a primary source would be something that was actually created in that time period, or something that was done by people in that time period, etc. Okay, objects, artifacts, and things that were created during that time period. Okay, so and now, so this is what I'm gonna bring up to this slide here: primary sources in reproduction, because there's a little bit of confusion. People will separate an artifact from the fact that the artifact is being I guess, made public by a third party, and they will tend to kind of disconnect that from being a primary source, and that would be an error. So, for example, if I show you a stela from the 18th dynasty, let's just say, and it's stored in the British Museum, and you go to the British Museum and you're looking at the object, just because you're standing in the British Museum and they have obvious control over it and so on and so forth, that doesn't take away from the fact that it is an actual primary source. Okay, so I'll read this slide. It says, for some levels of research, it is acceptable and appropriate to use primary sources that have been reproduced and published. A few examples include microfilmed newspaper articles, published diaries, and scanned images of original documents or facsimile published in book form. So this is important because, like, for example, you have papyri, the various different papyri, and a lot of people will be familiar with the so-called Book of the Dead, the Runu Per Imheru, of various different peoples. And the most famous one is the scribe Ani. That particular papyrus is held in the British Museum, and it's on display, and it's put inside of a glass casing, and I believe it's on display on the walls at the museum. Now they also have taken pictures of the papyrus and published it in books. You have several different books, publications of it. I think E.A. Wallace Budge is the most famous one that a lot of people will be familiar with. His publication of these facsimiles. Now, those are primary sources. It's just that they're reproduced in the form of an image so that it can be published and publicized, but it's still a primary source. So this is important. So this is why this is included on this slide. And there's people that will confuse that and say, well, that's not a primary source. I want to see the actual papyrus. And we all know that if you go over to Egypt, you're not going to be walking into the Cairo Museum, touching these objects yourself. Go to the British Museum, they're not going to let you pull the papyrus off the wall, open up the casing, and then just turn it over and feel it and everything like that. It's just not going to happen. So what a lot of people do, they'll take pictures of themselves, or they'll find the facsimiles of them to examine them. And but the point is that these are still primary sources. All right. And so here's just a few pictures of primary sources. So here's a pyramid text of Winis. A lot of people will say Unez. You can see his name inside of the Seshew, or most people will know as a cartouche. You see the hare, rabbit, water ripple, reed leaf, and a folded cloth, spelling out the name Winis. You can actually see it all over the place. You see all these different Seshew quite a bit. But it's a pyramid text. It's of the 5th dynasty and approximately dated to 2400 to 2300 BC. All right. So this would be considered a primary source, even as it is on the screen here. This will be a picture of the actual artifact, the actual object, because you're not going to take it home into your living room to look at it, because this is in Egypt still to this very day. All right. But it's still considered a primary source. Here's another one. The famous stela of King Jet of the 1st dynasty, approximately dated to 2980 BCE. Okay, this is the stela. And you can see the falcon, Heru, for the word Heru. And you see the sorek, which is a imitation of a palace facade, and then you see the cobra for the name within the sorek. So this is Heru Jet, King Jet of the 1st dynasty. So this would be a primary source. All right, a reproduction of a primary source, not a reproduction of the actual artifact, but a reproduction in the form of an image, even as you see it on the screen here. And here's an example of the papyrus, of Ani, that's in the British Museum. Okay, so you see how they have it enclosed. This is a smaller image of it, of one sheet, but they have it enclosed in a frame with a backdrop, but this is the actual artifact itself. Okay, and you can examine it. We can in terms of this particular object, we can use it to translate, because we're actually looking at the actual artifact itself. Even though this is a picture of it, we're not handling it with our own hands and everything, but it still would be considered a primary source. And I believe this is the last one, just to show a last example. This is from the 1st intermediate period, around approximately Dynasty 11, 2030 BC, and this is housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and that's the accession number 2895. And this particular object is a practice board for scribes, and it reads, it is clear from the awkwardly formed hieroglyphs and their uneven spacing that this is the work of an apprentice scribe who was practicing his penmanship. The writing board could be used again and again by scraping and wiping off the ink and adding a new coat of whitewash. All right, so this will be considered a primary source from this time period, even though it's housed in the museum and even though we're looking at a picture of it. All right, and I believe that is the last picture. Oh, this is the last picture. Now, this is a primary document, or a cropped picture of a primary document of the Papyrus Prissy of the 12th dynasty. And this is a famous papyrus because it contains the maxims of Ptah-hotep that a lot of people are familiar with. And this is a portion of it, this top portion that you see here. So here's a picture of the actual document. So this would be considered a primary source. Now, under it is a transcription of this simplified hieroglyphic script, as we would call Seshew Medew Netcher. So what you see is a simplified Seshew Medew Netcher, and then you will see a more formal pictorial style of Seshew Medew Netcher beneath it. And this right here would not be a primary source. Okay, so that's the difference. This is the primary source, and this is a transcription of it. And Egyptologists tend to take this simplified Seshew Medew Netcher and put it into a more formal pictorial version for clarity and for ease of reading for people who are studying it. But we of the Seshew Medew Netcher, we encourage and prefer to deal directly with the primaries ourselves. So in order to do so, we would have to learn this simplified version of the formal pictorial. So these are the exercises, these are things that we learn as a group because of our preference. But just in case people don't want to go to those lengths, then Egyptologists will transcribe it. Okay, and then you will have to pretty much rely on the transcriber's competency and accuracy, But if you are able to read the simplified version of this writing system, then you don't have to rely on the transcription, and that's just what we prefer. All right, but not everyone has different levels of rigor and study that they apply. All right, and I believe that is the last one. Yes. So I want to kind of open it up. So I wanted to go over those definitions and these few examples, these real short examples, and then open up the discussion, because I wanted to ask any of you all on the panel your experience on social media in terms of discussions about history, and then primary sources and whether people are misusing the terms or using them wrongly or what have you. So maybe you all can share some examples, or even you yourself, maybe, because a lot of times we will, in our learning process, we may misuse terms the wrong way at first. And then when we learn better, we do better. And I always say, when you know better, you do better. That's the way it should be. But before I open up the discussion, I want to show or put everyone on notice that coming this January 2017, Sonet Tonica will be teaching a penmanship course. So you'll be able to learn to write Seshew Medew Netcher, all right, in a simplified way that you see here on the screen, that you see over here on the right hand side. And we discussed last week the benefits of actually doing that and becoming a scribe, if you will, and to put it into practice. There's a lot of benefits, and I would encourage you to go back to the archives and listen, because it's nothing but benefits to that. So that's coming up in January. And also a new class group is forming. So if you know anyone who's interested in learning how to transliterate and translate, or to get into the study of Egyptian hieroglyphic writing system that we know as Seshew Medew Netcher, sign up. Go to the website, medewNetcher.com. It's mdw-ntr.com. Go there, sign up, or you can email or contact me on Facebook, or contact any member of the Seshew and let me know that you're interested, because we're forming a new class group. The classes are for 12 weeks. They total 24 hours, but it's extended out for 12 weeks, 2 hours a week. All right. And we walk through a beginner's introduction to Medew Netcher. So That course is designed to lay the solid foundation of all of the essentials, the basic information, the foundational information that you need to know, and equip you with the tools and the knowledge on how to use those tools in order to transliterate and translate basic Egyptian text. Okay, 12 weeks of your time, or 24 hours of your time totally, but 12-week duration of time, and you'll be set and good to go. And then from there, you can go to the next stage and learn the grammar. And then from there, you go to the next stage even after that and get into historical comparative linguistics if you so choose to. All right. So I just wanted to lay all that out. And now we can open it up for this discussion. I don't think I have to share any more slides again. So I'm going to come out of this. And yeah, if anybody wants to begin a discussion, go for it. Nobody.
Oh, I'll go ahead. No, I saw one. I saw one's microphone off, so I thought it was going to speak. But yeah, I haven't had any direct speaking of the primary sources and whatnot. I haven't been involved in any kind of discussions directly regarding that, but I've seen a lot of those discussions going on where sometimes someone will be asked for a primary source, but then you get the person and just including what you would probably call the secondary sources, where is someone going into analysis about something. So it's a second-hand opinion or something in that sense. So and that can I see that it can get frustrating, because there isn't, most people are not aware of what a primary source is and what an analysis or what an interpretation of what you call the secondary source is. So I see that happening a lot, and I guess I like to say it's good that we're going through this just so most people are aware of what it is. And I would also like to add that I wasn't, I've seen where people also discuss about the pictures. If somebody takes a picture of a pyramid in Kemet, and that's like, okay, that's not a primary source, that's just a picture. But from what we're learning, it is a primary source. Obviously, like you said, you can't, you're not going to carry a whole pyramid and bring it, so that would be considered reproduction of a primary source in that sense, and it will work as, primary source.
Mm-hmm. And see, now this is where, now see, we have to discuss the limitations of that as well, so it's not always clear cut, because we live in an age of Photoshop. So what can happen is people can take a picture either with their own cameras. They can go over to Egypt, take a picture of, let's say they walk into the temple of Seti I in Abydos, and they may take a picture with their own camera, physically do it. But then when they get home, they're a Photoshop whiz, and then they start Photoshopping things on there, and then they publish a Photoshop version of their picture. So we do have to be careful. So it's not like a clear, cut and dry definition or thing about the reproduction of the primary sources. So, it's all within reason. And we've seen people do that, not intentionally. We've seen some competitions, some Photoshop competitions where people will take Egyptian pictures and then, manipulate them and enter it into the competition. And I know one of the famous ones is, well, not so much Egyptian, but there was a famous competition done a few years ago where a group of guys submitted pictures of giants, and it was giant skeleton bones. And you can see people excavating graves or clearing out graves, and they're trying to, brush away the debris from these giant skeleton bones. But if you look at the real actual picture, the bones weren't giant at all, but it was manipulated and it was entered into the Photoshop competition. You have an instance where you see a mummy that's been photoshopped to make it look like an alien, I think a lot of people are familiar with that recently. And, you know, a lot of things. So we do have to be careful of pictures, you know, so I don't want to give the impression that, hey, a picture, you know, don't worry about it. Picture is all good. No, but, you know, we just got to have to be careful with that. So you have pictures. Oh, you were going to say something?
Yes, I was gonna say obviously that you know, with any kind of sources that you know, somebody's like researching on, you know, you have to kind of like put your, you know, you use your head, use your, you know, analyze everything and make sure that, you know, it is legit. And this is where you know, discernment, you know, come into place. So it could be just like even just reading, even if it's a secondary source, if you're reading something or looking through books and all of that. So I think that will also help, you know, just trying to figure out what is legit, what is not, because in a lot of things also get written. You know, people write a lot of things. So all of that will also kind of like critical analysis will also come into place when you're, you know, sourcing anything, whether it's primary sources or secondary or tertiary. You know.
Yeah. And that's good. I see Monica has a question. Are the source you all will be using comes from a picture you took in Africa? I'm not sure what that's being referenced to specifically, but on along those lines, the brother Antoine, I don't think Antoine is with us right now as of yet. Oh yeah, he's here.
Yeah, hotel family. I do got a question when we get done.
Okay, yeah,
Or,
aka Hush Your Mouth. Brother Antoine, recent trip to Kemet or modern day Egypt. He was able to take a lot of pictures. You know, when he came back, he shared it with us. We have that in the archives, our video archives as well. But that would be preferred as well. You know, if you can actually go take pictures yourself instead of relying on it because of this, you know, digital era where people can manipulate photos and things. But we have to remember that it's all, you know, science is about eliminating error. You know, you want to eliminate error. That's what you're moving towards, eliminate the elimination of error. And that's the reason why we're even talking about source classification in the first place, because the question is why primary sources and not secondary or tertiary sources, or which one is better out of the three? And then obviously the answer would be primary sources. And the reason why is because it stands it has a less potential of having error. And that's what science is about. You know, in order to make history more scientific, you want to deal with primary sources, you know, the actual objects, the actual people, you know, similar to any thing. Like, let's say an event takes place. Let's say something happens at, let's say a bank was robbed. You know, when the detectives and the police come on the scene, they want to talk to eyewitnesses, you know, people who were there, people who were inside the bank, people who were the actual people who were victims of the robbery. You know, you don't want to talk to you know, Uncle Tim that was around the corner 6 blocks away, you know, and he's going to talk about what he heard, and instead of somebody actually being there. So you want to get closest to the source as you can. So that's why you have this hierarchy of primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. So that's the whole thing. But Antoine, you said you had a comment or a question.
yeah, I'll start off with my comment, then I'll go into my question. But my basic comment, man, I feel like you must have been trolling me this week or something, because this concept or this information as it relates to these three concepts as far as primary, secondary, and attestation is very necessary. I was recently in a conversation over Facebook, and what I got into, or what the conversation dealt with, was to going back and, I guess, determining the responsibilities and the roles of the Netteroos.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone had, you know, were giving their opinion or what they have read, or maybe Wikipedia or what have you. And so my take on it was, can you find this behavior in literature, as far as a myth, or maybe in the Book of the Dead, Perenharu, or what have you? Can you find this this Neteru or deity doing this behavior that displays that they are passionate, or that they are a healer, what have you? I'm trying to be general because I know that this concept applies to very variety of areas. So that was one area where I felt like going to the primary instead as opposed to saying, oh, such and such said that this Neteru represents, or actually having some examples that show me why we came up with this theory or this belief about this Neteru.
Right.
So that was,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
not gonna say. So that was. I'm like, man, you must have been in that chat, or you must have saw me or something, because that kind of dealt with the direction I was trying to go.
Well, no,
they start.
It happens on social media. I witness it all the time. I witness it all the time. I engage it in a while. Matter of fact, there's a brother named Daniel. Some weeks ago, back, or maybe a month or so ago, when we were doing one of our hangouts like now, and he had mentioned something that got me very, very interested. He mentioned the fact that there's an obelisk or tekken that exists that has hieroglyphs on it, glyphs on it, that dates to 5000 BC. And so would be very, very interesting to me. I'm like, I want to see it like ASAP, like yesterday, because the reason why that would be important to me and to anybody is because the hieroglyphic writing system that we know as Seshew Netcher, it's not attested. And there's that word again, attestation, attested. It's only attested going back to 3320 BCE. So if this brother is saying that he has information about an obelisk that has the writing system on it that dates back to 5000 BC, that would be a huge find. That would be a huge find in the entire academic, academy scholarship. So I had asked him, since he mentioned, I said, well, give me some primaries on that. Give me some primary sources on that, facsimile, a picture. Where can I find it? Where is it stored? Who discovered it? How was it dated? And so on and so forth. And long story short, the brother didn't provide any of that. He provided tertiary, secondary and tertiary sources and I say that loosely because it wasn't really talking about an obelisk that existed in that time frame at all. So that was a recent example of me being involved with something like that. So yeah, I see it all the time. So yeah, so I'm not surprised that you saw it, what you just described as well. But we find that a lot, and that's why we chose to have this discussion now. So
People, they'll jump out and make these claims based on something that they've heard from somewhere else, and they won't be able to provide the actual primary that supports the claim, which is, it's a teaching moment for all of us, because we can all take the time. That's the thing about it. It's going to require you to research before you open your mouth. And so we can all take the time to go back if someone makes a claim. And, there's lots of times they say it's on the onus, or the onus is on the person that made the claim. Well, you made the claim, but I'm so interested in the topic that I'm going to start researching it myself as well. Another claim that was made was trying to date the ages of the Neterus, or which one came first was the topic. And so my basic premise was that, based on the literature, or based on, once again, mythology, or what we can actually pull up and read based on the Sesh, at what point in time, or what dynasty, or what kingdom, or was this Neteru's name first mentioned? Where in the text can we pull it up? Because if I see this person's name mentioned prior to this person's name, then that might be able to give us some accuracy on the date. Then again, we also know that some of the literature or some information was recopied in the Middle Kingdom, or further down throughout the dynasty. So that's something also to consider.
Mm-hmm. Well, now that's a thing. Now I've seen a couple of conversations in the past about the various different Netcheru, and trying to date them or trying to put one before the other. Okay, now some of them you can do that without a problem. But when you start talking about, because I see it, because remember, Africa, ancient Africa was oral. We're talking about oral societies. So when you try to date deities, like what is the criteria of the dating? Because you gotta, and then people have to understand what are deities, because before deities become deities, they are regular. I don't want to even say regular, but they're concepts and ideas in the minds of the people themselves anyway, before it becomes deified. So like, I'm gonna give you an example. Let's say hygiene. Let's say the normal hygiene that everybody is accustomed to or should be accustomed to, taking a shower, brushing your teeth, washing your face, cleaning, washing your hands, everything that goes up under hygiene. If we as a society want to stress that importance beyond the normalcy, then we would deify, and we would call it hygiene, and we would deify hygiene, make hygiene a god, and we in order to make it a mnemonic device to pass down through generations or whatever, we may create a narrative around it, and it'll be called a myth later on, but it'll be a narrative where we will probably anthropomorphize hygiene, make it into a human with a toothbrush head or something like that. So people have to understand that a lot of the deities are storages, mnemonic devices, storage containers for scientific data and concepts and ideas, mostly dealing with natural phenomenon, whether it's on a cosmic level, social level, or personal level. So to try to date that, it will be hard. So when people say that, they're really just talking about the formal naming of that, like let's say Ra or Wasir, Osiris, Heru, Het Heru, or Set. They're trying to date it and say, okay, well, Set is young, or Set is older in South Africa, or well, I see it a lot with Nubia, because a lot of people say Kush, and Nubia is the mother and grandmother of Egypt. Therefore, all these deities come from there, and this and that. But it's I don't see that being having a lot of value in trying to do that, unless you want to break down what the meaning of these deities' names, and that should be done first. A lot of people want to talk about chronology of which deities first, but why don't people need to look into what does it mean? What does the name Osiris mean? You know what I'm saying? What does the name Enpu mean? What does the name Osset actually mean? What does you can call off any deity. What do they actually mean, and in what language? And then you could trace it out linguistically, because we have to have scientific methods in order to do that. But anyway, that's my take on that.
Yeah, it may sound crazy. Can you give me an example of a third, fourth, and fifth primary?
A third, fourth.
Oh yeah. That kind of goes like, my question, what I was going to do, I was going to name off 3 different references, and I was going to see if you could tell me, based on the reference that I named, if it's a primary, secondary, or attestation.
Okay, go ahead.
But it's kind of like Kofi's question. So I'll start. The first one is, you showed the pyramid text, so that's the primary. Let's say I have a if I reference Manetho or Herodotus, what type of source is that?
That would be at best secondary. Now it depends, because it depends on what he's writing about. So if you reference Manetho, and Manetho is talking about what Manetho is doing and everything, then in that context, it could be primary because he's explaining what he's doing himself. What he's involved in. But if Manetho himself is talking about something that's historic to him and everything, then it becomes secondary.
So what about Herodotus? He mentioned Herodotus. Would Herodotus be a third source? I mean, I guess if I'm saying that right.
Well, like I said, it just depends on the context because the distinction between primary and secondary sources is really hinged on the context of what you're actually discussing. So like, for example, somebody like, for example, let's see, what would be good? Like somebody giving commentary about something and you are referencing the commentary, then you are referencing a secondary source.
So I'm thinking like, would this be a secondary or maybe even a third source if that's possible? But I'm reading Asar's book and he's talking about the trees. But in his book, he references a story of a grandfather talking to his grandchild about the tree and discipline him as he teaches him. So if I, so excuse me, sorry about that. So if I reference the story that he shared in his book, now I went through 2 different or 3 different levels of a reference.
Okay, yeah. See, now you're talking about literary references like citations and stuff like that. So if you, as an author, you are citing someone's work who is citing someone else, then that would be different. See, that would be that they would, they would call that that's a little different. I mean, it's similar, but that's different than what you were talking about. If I understand what you said, because if that's like citing sources. So if you're citing as a writer, as an author, you're citing a source. So let's say you write a book and I quote you from your book. I quote your book. I'm citing a source. So I'm using you as a primary, like I'm citing you directly. But if you in your book, you cite Dr. Theophile Obenga, and then I'm citing you cite Obenga, then, you see the layers there. So that kind of sounds like what you're talking about.
Right. What is that considered? What is that called? Is that secondary or?
Oh, definitely. Yes, that would definitely not be primary. If I'm quoting you, citing someone else, so I'm quoting your commentary about something that you are citing and commenting on, then that would be secondary.
All right. I have one more for you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching this guy posted video. In the video, the guy's making reference to the letter B, and he says that the B really means stability because it's a man's leg or what have you, and he's standing on a leg. And so now I'm like, man, where'd you get this information from? And he tells me this has been passed down through oral tradition. And what's our reference or our take on things that are said to be passed down through oral tradition? If it's true or if it's not true, that's their reference.
Okay, say that again because there's a difference. But just give that example again. You say that again.
A guy is telling me about the letter B,
mm-hmm.
and he talked about the sound is really a BK type sound as opposed to just a ba or a B sound, and he states that more importantly, it stands for stability based on the fact that it's a foot. So he's actually making it ideogram and giving meaning to it, saying that since it's a leg with a foot, it represents stability. And so I'm kind of like, I asked him, can you reference this or where are you getting this information from? And he says it's been passed down through oral tradition.
Well, that's not a primary source because if it's passed down, remember, a primary source is, we're talking about, because if you're talking about something that is stated, recorded, documented, or artifacts and items, tangible items themselves, they are the direct result of whatever time frame that you're dealing with, that you're talking about or studying. So if someone is saying that it's been passed down through generations, how many generations? Just the fact that they say generations, then it's secondary. You see what I'm saying? Because I can't talk about, we're in 2016. I can't talk about something in 1816 and say it's primary at all. There's no way of doing that at all, unless I find something from that era of time, something tangible, something recorded, documented, whatever, from that time frame, or me myself that I bore witness to or was involved with events during that time. But I didn't live 1,000 years, therefore nothing I can experience will ever be primary in that regards. So that would be secondary. So we had to be clear about that. Primary is dealing with direct, like direct within your reach of your lifetime, or an actual tangible object or event in your space of lifetime for it to be primary, in terms of you yourself. Everything else will be secondary, because that's when you get into an interpretation, an analysis of something, commentary about something, you know, that you yourself wasn't involved with directly, or held, or created, or witnessed, or what have you, you know. So remember, because I don't have the slide up anymore, but if I lived now, like let's say 9/11, the Twin Towers coming down. I lived during the era of time. Now we could talk about it hindsight, and I can write about it. It would be more of a primary source because especially if I was there, you know, let's say I was one of the firemen rescue workers that was there, and then 2016 I want to write a book about it. That would be a primary source, because I was involved, even though it's hindsight that I'm speaking about it, but I was involved. It was direct, and so on and so forth. It wouldn't be secondary in that sense. And like I said, these definitions are not 100% black and white. That's why on the slide I showed that it is a little bit blurry, and it depends on the context. So when you talked about the letter B and the guy saying that's you got to take that into consideration, the context. So when he says pass through the generations, that's not primary. Mm-mm.
All right. We got your bot.
And it's and that's why I sorry about that, cut you off. That's why I threw in there the word attested too, because word of mouth. I mean, we know this. We played the game in elementary school where all the children line up, and then on one end of the line, a teacher will whisper a short story in their ear, and then every child has to pass the story on to the next child until it gets to the end, and then the child at the end recites the story that they received, and it'd be totally different than what the teacher gave the first child. So word of mouth and things, we know through experimentation and studies that it can become distorted. So this is where and why science spends a large amount of time trying to get to the primary source and trying to get to attested things, as opposed to secondary, tertiary, and everything else. You know what I mean? So that's why. So we have to keep all that in mind.
Okay, we got your Bible, right? And we say that some of the authors wrote or produced the material 300 years after,
Yep.
quote unquote, you know, after the mythical individual, what have you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so based on that, since it was written 300 years later, and they were not there at that point in time to actually witness these events,
Mm-hmm.
the Bible would be considered a secondary.
Oh, it definitely wouldn't be eyewitness accounts, and that's an argument that's always held among people of the Abrahamic faith versus those who are not. When they want to question it, they're like for example, the disciples of Jesus and the first 4 books, so-called Gospels of the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were they eyewitnesses to the things? Like, for example, how do they have the hanging of Jesus, in their gospels if they weren't there? You know what I'm saying? If they weren't there to witness it, Jesus didn't write it. So how do they know what happened? Those are like just kind of logical things to ask. But no, that wouldn't be considered primary either. They're not eyewitnesses to the events. But see, now we can't confuse, that's what I said, in a historical setting, because, the classification of sources, or the importance of classification of sources when we say primary, secondary, tertiary, that comes out of the study of history, historiography. That's where it starts. And then other academic disciplines start to use that terminology as well, but they use it slightly different. So when we're talking about history, you have those definitions, and those are the definitions that I read, on the slide that I showed. But like, for example, let me just read this. This is from, let's see, what is the person's name? Give me 1 second. This is from an author, Helge Krag, and I'm probably pronouncing the name wrong. 1989, which is an introduction to the historiography of science. Okay, it says many sources can be considered either primary or secondary depending on the context in which they are used. Moreover, the distinction between primary and secondary sources is subjective and contextual, so that precise definitions are difficult to make. For example, if a historical text discusses old documents to derive a new historical conclusion, it is considered to be a primary source for the new conclusion, but a secondary source of the information found in the old documents. So you see the difference? And to go on, other examples in which a source can be both primary and secondary include an obituary, or a survey of several volumes of a journal counting the frequency of articles on a certain topic. So you all, is that clear? Hopefully I cleared up a little bit more.
To you.
All right. So yeah. It gets kind of tricky, but the thing is, and this is why, in these discussions on social media where you see, the problems a little bit. So that's why I wanted to bring it up for discussion, because really in our discussions with history, it is kind of straightforward. Primary source is direct. Just think direct. Secondary is a layer removed. Tertiary is a layer even removed from that. So either you're directly dealing with the information produced in the time frame that you're talking about. And this is why I threw in the word attestation as well, because you're dealing with actual objects that have survived, to this very day. This is why it's important. Like I always say that the Seshew Medew Netcher writing system, or the hieroglyphic writing system, is attested to 3320 BCE. Now, the writing system may very well be older than that, but that's as far back as we can go for attestation. That means we have tangible objects that we can prove and show. That is the best form of evidence, is the actual objects themselves, not word of mouth, not passed down through the generations and stuff like that, although that is evidence as well. But you can't beat having the object versus just not having the object and talking about it. So that's what I said. Science wants to work with the best. It wants to do the best to eliminate error. So that's why I also included the word attestation as well. So in our discussions, we want to go with primary, but we don't always have primary. And ancient Africa was oral. So we do have to rely on oral traditions and oral information, oral data that's passed down. But fortunate, and this is where Kemet becomes important. And a lot of people want to create this dichotomy between Kemet and Nubia, or Kemet and Kush, or Kemet and what's the other one? Well, they say Kemet, Nubia, Kush. A lot of people want to do that, but Kemet has the most literature, most documentation, and when an oral society, a group of people, start to materialize and crystallize what was once oral into a documented form, then we have something tangible to verify and check. So it only makes sense for us to use it. You know what I'm saying? So this is why we focus on Kemet and the documentation. Because one thing, that if things are passed down through a continuum like that, it shouldn't contradict. I shouldn't find 20 papyri that says one thing, and then somebody tells me some oral tradition from the same people says something different. You know what I'm saying? We shouldn't have that. And if we do, at least we have something to examine and scrutinize, So that's the benefit of why Kemet is focused on a lot when it comes to Nile Valley history, that whole area, that whole region, from Uganda, Kenya on up, Sudan, Ethiopia, Egypt today, and all of that, So that's what we have to deal with. Because I always ask people because a lot of people will almost on a complaining vibe of, why do you talk about Kemet so much, and how come nobody talks about Kush and Nubia? And then I always talk about, why we shouldn't use the word Nubia. But then when we get down to it, I'm like, well, produce a lot of the literature from these other places. Just produce it and we'll talk about it. Just produce it. I said, it's just a plethora of, Kemet is the most documented ancient civilization culture that there is. You're still finding stuff, so a lot of people say, well, there's more pyramids in Sudan than there are in Kemet, and then they'll show the picture. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But see, people will say it, not just to say it and say, oh yeah, it's a lot of them in there. They'll say it as if it's better or whatever. And I don't know that we should do that. I don't know that we should do that. Why create a competition out of it? Let's just use them both as a resource and learn from it. So.
Yes, I was going to ask if you could just clarify one more time. If we have the transcriptions of, from the original primaries, would that be a reproduction of a primary, or that would be considered secondary source?
That's a secondary.
All right.
Like the example I gave with the papyrus Prissy, it would be a transcription of a primary, but the transcription itself will be secondary because somebody had to come after the fact and transcribe it, and now you're relying on the accuracy of that transcription than looking directly at the primary. So that would set that apart from each other. So I guess at the bottom of it all is that our interest should be in the elimination of error at all possible causes. That's the goal, to eliminate error. So either you have a primary source, which is the papyrus right there in front of you, and then if you go to transcribe it and transcribe it on another medium, let's say you're looking at and this is what Egyptologists have done. They will sit at a temple and they will set up their tripod and their paper and everything like that. And they will sit there for days upon days, weeks, and stay there and redraw what you see on the wall. And that's what you see in some of these books, these transcribing of what is on the wall. So the wall itself is the primary. The scholar who is transcribing it can potentially make errors. He may skip glyphs, he may draw them wrong, or whatever the case is. Not to say that it is, but I'm saying the potential is there. So as a scientist, we want to eliminate error. So we would prefer to deal directly with the wall. But if we can't, we'll deal with the scholar's reproduction of it. But knowing that there's room for error. So at the end of the day, the whole point is to try to eliminate error as much as possible. And so this is why primary is always asked. When people make claims, you're like, well, do you have a primary source for that?
What would it be if somebody was 7 years old, they saw an alien? That'd be a secondary source?
Wait. Say it again.
What would it be if when somebody was 7 years old, they saw an alien? The alien came and spoke to him. Would that be a primary?
No, see, that's what I mean. Like earlier, what I was saying, like we're mixing up sources of documentation and historical artifacts and things like that for a new context of eyewitness, like witnessing, and stuff like that, because so that's a different context. So if a 7-year-old claims to have seen an alien, that same 7-year-old most likely will be the same child that will say they saw the boogeyman in the closet or something like that. So the statement, the truthfulness, see, don't confuse the truthfulness of a statement based on the source. So it's a direct source. If you heard from the child yourself and the child themselves said, hey, I saw an alien, that is a direct source. That is a primary source for that statement and that claim. But the truthfulness of it is a completely different topic. Completely different ways of discerning the truthfulness of it. So we can't confuse the classification of a source versus its truthfulness of it. Because even, like, I'm just going to give an extreme example. We could be standing right in Egypt looking at a wall, an ancient wall that wasn't modified by nothing modern. It was done by the ancient Egyptians themselves, and we're standing right there. Let's say we're at Edfu, and we're at the corner, and we're looking at these glyphs right there on the wall. That is a primary source. But whatever those glyphs are saying and everything like that, the truthfulness of it could be completely wrong. Those glyphs can say that the earth is flat, the sun goes around the earth, and all that kind of stuff. Let's just say the glyphs read that. Let's just say that was the message in the glyphs. The message in the claim is wrong itself, but it's still a primary source. So I don't want to confuse. Maybe I should have said that at first as well. We can't confuse source classification for the accuracy of whatever we're dealing with. Okay, they're different things.
Was it that's why we I think you were talking about primary source or primary sources and attestation in this sense. That would be like if it is attested, validating that something it is a fact and it's true.
Right. So, right. But I just want to make it clear. Maybe I should have. So that's my apologies for that. But we have to make a distinction between source classification and accuracy of claims or statements, claims, and the information.
Yeah, I think that is good because most people will actually say, what St. Judy was asking about. Some people will be like, well, they do have a primary source, so and so said. So, and you'll be like, that's what's needed. So I guess it is good that, it has to be clarified that it's not just about having a primary source in that sense, because that could also be, especially when you're dealing with witnesses or, and stuff like that, doesn't mean that, it is truth or what, just because you have a primary source.
Yes, and that's a good thing. And like I said, I should have made that clear from the start that A primary source does not mean true. They don't necessarily equate to one another. All right, so we need to make that clear. Primary, when we say primary and we say secondary and we say tertiary, we're saying 1, 2, and 3, and we're talking about a hierarchy of source, and these are classification of sources. The truthfulness of whatever the issue is a different animal, is a different thing. Okay, because you can have a primary source, but it could be 100% wrong in whatever it does to claim, or whatever the case is. So I should have made that clear from the start. And that's what we have to, because see what happens is, see that goes over into a logical fallacy. Probably the closest one that fits is arguing from authority. And that's a logical fallacy where you say, basically it goes like, well, Dr. So-and-so said it, so it must be true. And that's a logical fallacy, because I don't care what and who you are, just because you say it does not automatically make anything true.
See, it was appealing to authority. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Appealing to authority. Exactly. That's the closest logical fallacy to that, and that's what people do as well. Like, okay, well, I got a primary source, therefore it's true. No, that's appealing to authority. Same concept. So we have to be careful. So yeah, I should have made that clear at first. I'm looking at the chat real quick. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything, because I do see a couple of questions here. Black history. Can't a tertiary source be a collection of primary sources? Yeah, if you saw the definition that I put, it's usually a they say it's a distillation, like how I put it was a collection, like a data collection of things. Like, for example, an encyclopedia would be tertiary, where, a whole bunch of different articles, a collection of articles, put in alphabetical order based on the topic, or alphabetical order based on the original author, such as journals and things like that. Those would be considered tertiary. I'm just going down the list. So it says, why shouldn't we use the word Nubia? The reason why is because in Egyptological literature, all they did was they substituted the word Negro for Nubia. And that would be a gross misrepresentation of the facts, of the data, because south of Egypt, you had several different communities, and they were named, and we know the names of them because they're within the literature itself. So you have Ta-Nehesi or Nehesi, you have Yam, you have Wawet. These are just three I'm naming off the top of my head. You have several different communities that was below the borders of Kemet at the time, and everyone lumps them all together and call them Nubia. But that can get very confusing. But I'm just telling you, the reason why they did that was because all they did was say that below Egypt lived the Negroes. And then when the word Negro became politically incorrect to use, they switched it to Nubia. And a lot of people don't realize that. So when they say Nubia, it's not a good representation. And then it gets confusing because Nubia as a toponym, as a place, is actually within Kemet. You have Ombos and Kom Ombo. Both of those places was known as places of gold. And that's where you get the word Nub from, gold. And these were gold places where they mined gold from. And they're within the borders of Kemet. So if you want to talk about south of Kemet, how are you going to talk about names that's within Kemet? So it gets very, very confusing really quick, really quick. A lot of people don't realize it. So those are some of the reasons why we shouldn't use the word Nubia. We should use the words that are attested. If we want to talk about a people, let's talk about Ta-Nehisi. Let's talk about, you got Taseti, Ta-Nehisi, you got Wawet, you got Yam. I can't recall the others off the top of my head, but remember the 9 bows, the so-called 9 bows. There were 9 communities that were prevalent. So they're 9 and they're more than 9, but they're 9 prevalent, and they were referred to as the 9 bows that were below the southern border of Kemet, that first cataract. What is different between a transcription and a picture? Well, a transcription is just that. It's a script that's transferred. So it's basically you are transcribing. You are like me talking right now. If you wanted to record what I'm saying in written format, in a script format, that would be considered transcribing. You would be transcribing what I'm saying. And I would call what I'm doing dictation or dictating. I'm dictating to you and you are transcribing what I'm dictating. A picture is just that. A picture is an image. It's a visual image. All right. So that's the difference between that. And but like I said, transcription, don't confuse. Transcription is not always from vocal or audible to visual or written. It's also from written to written. It's different from transliterations because, you know, you're basically mapping out one script from a source or a source writing system to the script of a target writing system. That's transliteration. That's different. Transcription would be if I'm going to copy something from one medium to another. Like if I'm looking at the wall, then I can transcribe it. If I'm listening to you talk, I can transcribe it. So those are the differences there. I'm scrolling down to see if I miss anything. And I guess not. So anybody on the panel have any more, anything else? I hope what I'm saying is clear because, you know, like I said, I should have made that clear from the get-go as far as the primary, don't confuse primary source with accuracy. They're not always mutually one and the same, although it can be. You know.
Now everything is clear. It makes sense.
All right. Well, I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss anything in the chat. You know, and these are one of those topics that, you know, it's one of those. Well, I guess it should be straightforward, but no, it's not. It's not. It can get confusing real fast. About that, I've seen it happen.
Yes, and I guess at some point also it might be good to go over. I know it's dealing with this kind of stuff that we do with ancient Egypt, researching and actually finding primary sources. You know, I know it can get a little bit, you know, exhausting and it's difficult most of the time. And I guess that's why most people would, you know, kind of toss it to the side and work with the secondary sources instead when referencing and stuff like that. So maybe that would be a good one to go over at some point, you know, how to seek and find, you know, primary sources and also how to reference them as well and all of that.
Okay. Yeah. And also that it's because people, it's not like elevated or emphasized enough for us to deal with primary sources, that, or even the confusion of it, that people will say some other things such as the reliance on non-African sources for African phenomena. So like, for example, people are under the assumption that everybody who deals with Kemet is relying on European Egyptology because they have all of the information, you know, like we're getting everything from Europeans. Therefore, what we're getting is European. And that's really silly because like I said earlier, if I want to deal with the papyrus of Ani, the Book of the Dead of Ani, or the Peret Imheru of Ani, then we have to first establish, in terms of African versus European, was it an African that wrote the papyrus, or was it a European? And then once we establish that it was an African that wrote it, it doesn't matter who is housing it or who owns it right now in 2016. Well, if I walk up into the British Museum and I can see it displayed there, which is a European country, Britain, that doesn't change the content of or the authorship of the actual artifact or, you know, the item. But people will confuse that and say, hey, you got that from Europeans. Like, no, you know, they hold it, but I'm looking at it. And you know, I'm dealing with the actual information. I'm dealing with the primary itself. So that's, you know, so I think if more and more people understand the concepts of source classification and know that source classification is different than accuracy of different things, but as long as people can understand that, and we start moving towards the preference of dealing with primary sources, then people won't make those silly statements as well. Like, you know, we deal simply with European sources for African phenomena, and that's just not true. You know, but I see Black History. He's clarified his question. He said, my question wasn't clear. So he's asking, what's the difference between a picture and transcription as it relates to sourcing? Okay, now the difference, if I understand your question correctly now, is that a picture is a one-for-one reproduction of an object without error, unless there's visible artifacts in the film that you took a picture on, like if you're doing a Kodak or olden days, or if it's digital. Nowadays it's pretty much one for one. Okay, versus transcription, if a man or woman sat there and redrew the wall versus somebody taking a picture of it, the picture is more reliable because of the actual technology of the camera and everything like that. It can actually take a true to life duplication of it, whereas a human being, man or woman, will sit there and redraw it. That leaves more room for error. So that will be the difference, or one of the differences between the two, in terms of sourcing.
Yeah, actually, the picture of it would be considered a facsimile, which is an exact copy of it. So
yeah, and that would be considered, that would equate to being a primary. And like I said, there's no black and white, cut and dry, one definition fits all to primary and secondary. So we can't box it in like that. It's just that's why I say at the end of the day, the bottom line is that the goal is to eliminate error. So if you had a choice between getting a picture of an Egyptian temple wall versus a human being's drawing of that same wall, which would you choose? That's what it really comes down to. And you would choose the picture over the human being, because the human can misdraw a glyph or omit a glyph, but the picture, the way the technology is today and everything, it would be an exact image of it. Only thing in the picture you have to worry about is lighting or shadows or something like that, but you don't have to worry about the possibility of human error. So the choice, you know, is a preference. La Marie, it says authenticity is in question, I guess, when it comes to where the artifacts are located. Yeah, well, there's a whole authentication process. Yeah, so that's a process within itself, because even in different academic circles, they have authentication processes that are not universal for all disciplines, but a lot of disciplines do have them. Like, for example, in the American court system, in the judicial system, they have a way of authenticating documents, you know, authenticating your birth certificate, authenticating your identification and things like that. And in archaeology and whatnot and things, they have ways to authenticate, like, and you'll see it a lot commercially in movies when it comes to paintings. You know, they'll say, well, how do you know this Picasso or Da Vinci's masterpiece is actually authentic? You know, is it fake? Is it real? Is it authentic? Is it a reproduction? Is it a knockoff? You know, they have ways to authenticate things. So that would have to be studied and learned, so people will be in the know about that.
Another thing on social media you got to be aware of is when they they have pictures of Indians, say they're Native American, and it'll be from a different time period, or it might be a tribe in Africa and that tribe might misrepresent it. So you got to be careful with that too. I ran into that.
Yeah, that's true too. Context is everything. Context is everything, you know. And you know what's interesting, and this is probably the last thing I'll say. Matter of fact, Neil deGrasse Tyson has a video. Well, there's a video with him in it, and I forgot the title of the video, but it's a video where he's talking about UFOs. He's talking about aliens, and he's talking about UFOs, and he's talking about the strength of eyewitness testimony. He's talking about the strength of testimony, and he's given an example. He gives an example of in science, what people do in science versus what people do in just day-to-day, everyday living, the lay population. And he was saying in science, eyewitness testimony, like if we were to have a scale from 0 to 10, 0 being the worst and 10 being the best, he said that eyewitness testimony would be at the bottom of the list within scientific fields. But he made a point to say that, which is terrible, because he said in the court system, eyewitness testimony is on the top of the list. And so after he said that, he explained why. He said that eyewitness testimony, our human senses, see, touch, taste, hear, smell, are very frail. They're easily manipulated. He said so they're the worst things that we can rely on when it comes to reality and truth. Which sounds kind of odd, but it makes sense. And he said, and he was basically saying, I'm paraphrasing, of course, was basically saying this is why in science we develop instrumentations and technologies and things to extend the human senses to make them more less prone to error. You know what I mean? So, and then he gave the example of the little boy, the classroom where you tell a story, you know, like I said, you tell a story to one child, and by the time it goes through 50 children, the story completely changed. But yet they're directly hearing it from ear to ear, all within the same day, or however long it takes to tell a story. They're doing it in that short span of time, and you can see that the story changes. So how do we eliminate that? How do we eliminate error and stuff? So that's where scientific instrumentation comes into play, where you have math. Math is a big part of a lot of different scientific fields. You know, so it's you have to use a more objective language than a subjective language when you're dealing with science. So that was some of the things that he was pointing out. And so and we have to keep all that stuff in mind. You know, eyewitness testimony of all these different things. So that's when you ask me, you know, if a 7-year-old says, you know, they saw an alien, in science that won't work. Now I don't remember the name of the video, but yeah, just matter of fact, on YouTube in the search bar, just type in deGrasse Tyson or Neil deGrasse Tyson and UFO. Just type in those words like that or whatever, and it should come up, and you'll see it. It'll be real interesting. He makes an excellent point about that. But well, that's all I have for this topic, for tonight. I just want to kind of bring it up and discuss it a little bit, because it is a blurred topic, and we can definitely understand how it can get confusing, So anybody else have any comments or questions on the panel?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that is it's really good, and obviously what we see a lot nowadays is especially say since we have a YouTube and all of that, and we have a lot of teachers on YouTube, it's a lot of teachings going on and no referencing, no primary sources, not a lot of just pretty much no authentic or attested sources and all of that. So I think it's really good that we touch on that, and the more people understand this, the more the people watching or learning can dissect what kind of information they're getting. It's always good to ask for this kind of sources. It just kind of it strengthens every point that is made.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what it's all about. It's about accuracy. Now, remember, science. This is another thing. Now, we didn't bring this up, but might as well mention it and close out with this. Burden of proof. That's a whole nother topic as well. Burden of proof, and that gets a little confusing in social media discussions also, because a lot of people are making claims, and then they'll make a claim. Like, for example, I'll make a claim and then I'll ask you to prove me wrong. And that's just backwards. That's not the way it goes. The burden of proof is always on the claimant. The responsibility or the burden of proof rests on the shoulders of the person or people who are making the claim. You have to demonstrate proof of your claim or provide the evidence that supports your claim, not the other way around. But we see this a lot on social media, where a claim will be made and then somebody will say, well, prove me wrong, and that is 180 degrees backwards, but I bring that up because in discussing, primary sources and attestation and things like that, and we're talking about the frailty of human senses and stuff like that, we have to remember that this is what science is. Science is two things. Well, a lot of people should know that the word science means to know. It comes from a word that means to know in general. And it comes out to be two things. Science itself is a body of knowledge itself. So it's an accumulation of knowledge. But how was that knowledge obtained? And that leads into the other definition of science. Science is the tools and methods that's used in order to allow us to know when something is known. And it does that by its original meaning, going way back in its etymological meaning, which is to cut, which is to slice or cut up and dissect. So science, in all of its meanings, from its original meaning to cut, dissect, in terms of the Indo-European root or etymological origin, all the way up into its use today, it has something to do with elimination, cutting something and eliminating, cutting something and eliminating, trimming. So we have to remember the concept of science is always trying to trim off error. So if we look at it in terms of, I guess analogy would be meat. You're trying to trim off the fat. So science is always trying to trim off the fat. You weigh it, still some fat there, trim it off, weigh it, still some fat there, trim it some more off. So science is always in a process of eliminating. You don't prove things in science. You actually attempt to falsify things. And this is the big difference between science and pseudoscience. Science deals with falsifiable things, and pseudoscience doesn't. If it's not falsifiable, then it's not science. So remember that science seeks to falsify things. So you create a hypothesis, you observe some kind of phenomenon, you have a hypothesis about it, Then you go through rigorous testing and retesting and speculations and things like that. And then, you know, once you can reproduce whatever, then you come away with an explanation of the facts. And that explanation of those substantiated facts becomes a theory. So science is always seeking to eliminate error. And what happens is the whole concept is based on, if you eliminate error enough, all you're going to be left with is reality. That's the idea behind science. Okay, so, and it ties into this burden of proof thing where people are making these claims, but they don't go through the process of eliminating error. Okay, so I just wanted to, you know, kind of end with that, but that's what science is about, and it ties into what we're dealing with. All right. So if nobody else has anything else to say, you know, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I will pass the mic over to Sonat Tonica for any closing words.
All right. Dua for the information, and dua for those who've been watching and those who are going to be watching later on. And I would just like to say that if you'd like to get more into this kind of discussions, you can join our group page on Facebook, which is under the name Seshew Medew Netcher. And if you'd like to learn the language or get more information on it as well, you can go to the website www.medunetcher.com, which is mdw-ntr.com. And we have also some videos on our archive. If you haven't watched those, you can go ahead and do that. And if there's something that you feel you'd like to share with others, also, you know, feel free to share the videos that we have on the archive with others on Facebook or, you know, other social media pages as well. So with that, I'd like to say get an affair and share my motive.